Have you ever poured your heart and soul into something only to be told you're not enough? This is the story of how I transformed my family's failing textile business into a global fashion empire worth $500 million, revolutionized an entire industry, and then watched my father hand it all to my brother who had barely set foot in a factory. It's the story of being told to stay in my lane, to be grateful for the crumbs when I had baked the entire cake. But more importantly, it's the story of what happened next, how I walked away with nothing but my notebook and returned with everything, including my self-worth. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jessica Winters, and growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, I never imagined I'd become the woman who would redefine American textile manufacturing. My childhood home sat just 3 blocks from Winters Fabrics, the small textile mill my grandfather William started after returning from the Korean War with little more than determination and a knack for machinery. From the outside, our business looked like a modest success story, a family operation that had survived when most textile production moved overseas. Our single factory employed around 60 people, mostly locals who had worked with us for generations. We produced basic cotton fabrics, nothing revolutionary, just honest materials that kept the lights on and supported our community. By the time I was 10 years old, I was fascinated by the rhythmic clatter of the looms. While most kids spent weekends at the mall or watching TV, I would beg my father James to take me to the factory. He'd smile indulgently, patting my head before saying, "Sure thing, Jessie. You can help me with the paperwork." But I never wanted the paperwork. I wanted to understand how everything worked, from the raw cotton coming in to the finished bolts of fabric going out. My brother Tyler was different. 4 years older than me, he had our father's confident swagger and easy charm. While I counted inventory and studied textiles, Tyler played football and learned to golf. "That's where the real business happens," Dad would explain. "On the golf course, not the factory floor." Tyler nodded sagely, as if at 16 he already understood the secrets of success that eluded me. Our family dynamic was never explicitly stated, but always understood. Tyler was being groomed to take over the business someday. I was expected to find a nice man, perhaps a lawyer or doctor, have children, and maybe handle the company's bookkeeping, if I really wanted to stay involved. My questions about production methods and material innovation were met with tolerant amusement, as if I was a child playing dress-up in a world that would never truly belong to me. Despite this, I pursued my passion. I studied textile engineering at North Carolina State, then earned my MBA at Wharton with a focus on sustainable business practices. While my classmates chased jobs at consulting firms and tech startups, I had a single goal: returning home to transform Winters Fabrics into something remarkable. I came back to Charlotte in 2008, at the worst possible time. The financial crisis had hit our industry hard, and Winters Fabrics was on life support. Orders had dropped by 60%. 2 of our largest clients had gone bankrupt, owing us thousands. Dad had already let go of a third of our workforce and was contemplating selling the factory entirely. "It's a different world now, Jessie," he told me over dinner my first night back. "American textile manufacturing is dead. China can make it. Cheaper, faster, with no environmental regulations. We can't compete." "But what if we stopped trying to compete on their terms?" I asked, pulling out the business plan I'd been developing throughout graduate school. "What if we transformed completely?" My proposal was comprehensive. Pivot from mass-produced basic fabrics to specialized technical textiles. Develop proprietary processes for creating high-performance materials for medical, automotive, and athletic applications. Invest in sustainable practices that would allow us to market our products as environmentally responsible alternatives to overseas options. Modernize our production facility to reduce waste and increase efficiency. Dad flipped through my meticulously prepared presentation with a furrowed brow. Tyler, who had joined the company right out of college but spent most of his time in sales, rather than operations, skimmed a few pages before pushing them aside. "This would cost millions we don't have," Dad said finally. "I've outlined the funding options," I countered. "We can start small, reinvest profits, seek targeted grants for green manufacturing." "It's too risky," Tyler interrupted. "We need to stick with what we know." Dad nodded. "Your brother's right. This isn't the time for experimentation." I sat back, trying to mask my frustration. "So, what's the plan then? Keep cutting staff until there's nothing left? Sell the factory to developers who'll tear it down for condos?" A tense silence followed before Dad sighed heavily. "I'll let you implement some of your efficiency ideas. Small steps, nothing drastic. You can be our operations director. See if you can cut costs enough to keep us afloat while Tyler and I figure out our next move." I wanted to argue that I had already figured out our next move, but I recognized the opportunity, limited as it was. Operations Director, not a title that existed before I came home, and certainly not one with any real authority. But it was a foot in the door, and that was all I needed. I started small, as instructed. I reorganized the production floor to eliminate bottlenecks. I implemented a digital inventory system to replace our paper ledgers. I renegotiated with suppliers, finding ways to save pennies per yard that added up to thousands per month. Within 6 months, we had reduced operating costs by 17% without a single layoff. But I wasn't satisfied with just cutting costs. Late at night, after everyone had gone home, I would work on my real vision. I converted an unused storage room into a small research and development space. I reached out to former classmates now working in medical research, automotive design, and athletic wear development. I sourced small quantities of specialized fibers and experimented with blending techniques. After 9 months of secret development, I created our first prototype, a moisture-wicking antimicrobial fabric with potential applications in medical settings and high-performance athletic wear. The material was remarkable, lighter than competitors' offerings, but more durable, with better recovery and breathability. Most importantly, we could produce it domestically at a cost that still allowed for healthy margins. I presented the prototype to Dad and Tyler at our monthly planning meeting. "This is what will save winter's fabrics," I explained, passing around samples. "Not competing with overseas mass production, but creating something they can't replicate." Dad fingered the material with curiosity. "It feels different." "What is it?" "The future," I answered simply. Tyler remained skeptical, but Dad, perhaps desperate for any solution, gave me limited permission to explore the idea, as long as it didn't interfere with our regular production and didn't require significant investment. I worked with those constraints, carving out time and resources wherever I could find them. I contacted small, innovative athletic wear startups, too new to have established overseas manufacturing relationships. I offered them exclusivity on our new materials in exchange for slightly higher prices and public partnership announcements. Our first client was Everest Athletics, a rock climbing apparel company with a passionate following but limited production capacity. Their founder, Rachel Chen, visited our factory, tested my prototypes, and immediately placed an order that was small by industry standards, but substantial for us. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," she told me as we finalized the paperwork. "Performance that matches the big brands, but with a sustainable, made-in-America story we can be proud of." The Everest partnership was a turning point. Their first collection using our fabrics sold out in days. Other boutique brands took notice, and our phones started ringing. Within a year, we had shifted 20% of our production to these specialized materials, which generated 40% of our revenue despite the smaller volumes. I reinvested every penny of profit into further research and modernization. I hired 2 textile engineers from my alma mater and created a proper R&D department. We developed a proprietary finishing process that improved the performance of recycled polyester to match virgin materials, allowing us to market our products as eco-friendly without sacrificing quality. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By year 3, we had doubled our workforce and were running at full capacity. Tyler, seeing the success, suddenly became interested in my division. He began bringing potential clients to tour the factory, positioning himself as the visionary behind our transformation. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that results mattered more than recognition. In year 5, our breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. A major medical supply company contacted us about developing antimicrobial fabrics for hospital settings. The contract would require significant expansion of our facilities, but would guarantee orders for the next decade. "This is it," I told Dad. "This is what I've been working toward. We need to expand now to secure our future." For once, Dad agreed without hesitation. We secured financing, purchased the abandoned factory adjacent to our property, and installed state-of-the-art equipment. I personally oversaw every aspect of the expansion, often sleeping on a cot in my office for weeks at a time to ensure everything proceeded according to plan. The medical contract was just the beginning. Once we demonstrated our capability to produce at scale while maintaining exacting standards, other industries took notice. Automotive manufacturers came to us for lightweight, durable interior fabrics. Aerospace companies sought our flame-resistant materials. Military contractors requested specialized textiles for next-generation uniforms. By year 7, Winters Fabrics had transformed from a struggling traditional textile mill into Winters Technical Materials, a leader in specialized fabric innovation. Our workforce had grown from 60 to over 500. Our revenue had increased from $5 million annually to nearly $100 million. We had diversified into 5 distinct product lines, each with proprietary technologies protected by patents I had secured. I no longer worked from a hidden storage closet. I had a proper office now, though I still spent most of my time on the production floor or in the R&D lab. My team had expanded to include some of the brightest minds in textile engineering, many of whom turned down offers from larger companies to work with us because of our reputation for innovation. Dad seemed genuinely impressed by what I had built, though he still introduced Tyler as his right-hand man at industry events, despite the fact that Tyler's role had become increasingly ceremonial. Tyler handled client dinners and golf outings, while I managed the actual operations, innovations, and strategic decisions that kept us growing. By our 10th year, we had reached $500 million in annual revenue. We operated 3 specialized production facilities across North Carolina and had become one of the largest employers in the region. Industry publications featured us as a case study in successful American manufacturing revival. Competitors tried to replicate our model, but our head start and continual innovation kept us several steps ahead. I had just turned 38 when Dad called a special family meeting at the lake house where we had spent summers growing up. I arrived to find Dad, Tyler, and our company's longtime legal counsel, Michael Brennan, seated on the deck overlooking the water. "Jessica," Dad began, using my full name as he did when discussions were serious. "You've done remarkable things for Winters. The company wouldn't exist today without your vision." I felt a warmth spread through me at the acknowledgement I'd waited so long to hear. But something in Dad's tone made me wary. "As you know, I'm turning 70 next month," he continued. "It's time for me to step back and enjoy retirement while I still have my health. Which means it's time to formalize the next generation of leadership." He glanced at Tyler, who sat up straighter, a small smile playing at his lips. My stomach tightened as I suddenly understood why we were meeting. "Tyler will be taking over as CEO effective next quarter," Dad announced. "I've already discussed the transition with the board, and they've approved unanimously." I sat perfectly still, feeling as though I'd been doused with ice water. "I see," I said finally, my voice surprisingly steady. "And what role do you envision for me in this new structure?" "You'll remain Chief Innovation Officer," Dad replied quickly, as if relieved I hadn't immediately objected. "Your technical expertise is invaluable, and you'll continue leading R&D. Nothing changes with your department. Except that I'll report to Tyler." Dad nodded. "That's the natural order of things, Jesse. Tyler's been groomed for leadership his entire life. He has the relationships with our key accounts, the presence in industry organizations. He's the face people associate with Winters. Because you've positioned him that way," I said quietly. "Despite the fact that I built the company into what it is today." Tyler cleared his throat. "Let's be fair, Jess. You developed some great products, but I'm the one who sold them. Without me making deals, without you taking credit for my work," I interrupted, a decade of suppressed frustration finally surfacing. "Tell me, Tyler, can you explain how our phase change materials actually function? Do you understand the chemistry behind our antimicrobial finishes? Could you troubleshoot a single piece of equipment on our production floor?" "That's not the point," Dad interjected. "A CEO delegates the technical details. Tyler understands the big picture, the market position, the client relationships." "So do I countered, "along with every operational aspect of this business." Dad's expression softened into something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Jessica, you're brilliant at innovation. No one's disputing that. But leadership requires a certain natural authority, a presence. You've always been more comfortable behind the scenes, with your research and your machines. You've never given me the opportunity to be anything else." "Because it's not your strength," Dad said firmly, as if explaining something to a child. "You're not suited for the CEO role. You never have been." I felt something shift inside me at those words, not a breaking, but a clarification, as if pieces that had been jumbled for years suddenly aligned to reveal a clear picture. Every moment I had been overlooked, every time my contributions had been minimized, every instance where Tyler had been pushed forward while I was held back, it wasn't circumstance. It was deliberate. I could have argued further. I could have listed my accomplishments, detailed my qualifications, demanded recognition. Instead, I simply nodded and said, "Thank you for clarifying where I stand." "I'm glad you understand," Dad replied, visibly relieved. "This is what's best for the company." "I understand perfectly," I said, rising from my chair. "If you'll excuse me, I have some matters to attend to." I drove home in a strange state of calm, as if watching myself from a distance. When I arrived at my apartment, I didn't cry or scream or break things as part of me wanted to. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a new folder titled Genesis Project. That night, I meticulously documented every innovation I had developed, every process I had created, every vision I had for the future of technical textiles. I didn't sleep. By morning, I had outlined not just my past contributions, but a blueprint for my future. One that no longer included Winter's technical materials. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering information, copying files I had legal rights to, and preparing for what would come next. I had built Winters into what it was today, but I realized now that I had been building on someone else's foundation, trying to prove my worth to people who had decided long ago what my ceiling would be. It was time to create something that was entirely mine from the beginning. I submitted my resignation on a Wednesday morning, leaving it on Dad's desk before he arrived. 2 paragraphs, professionally worded, giving the standard 2 weeks' notice. By the time he found it, I had already briefed my key team members and cleared my personal items from my office. Dad called immediately. "This is ridiculous, Jessica. You're having an emotional reaction. Let's discuss this rationally." "There's nothing to discuss," I replied calmly. "I've made my decision." "Is this because of Tyler?" Because we can revisit the reporting structure if that's what's bothering you. This isn't about reporting structures. This is about recognition and respect. I've given everything to Winters, and in return, I've been told repeatedly that I'm not enough. I'm simply choosing to invest my energy somewhere it will be valued. Where? He demanded. Some competitor? Because you're non-compete. I'm not joining a competitor, I assured him. I'm creating something new. There was a long pause before Dad spoke again, his voice suddenly cautious. You know, all our technical innovations are company property. The patents, the processes, are fully documented and will remain with Winters, I finished for him. I understand intellectual property law, Dad. I'm not taking anything that doesn't belong to me. What I didn't say was that my most valuable asset couldn't be locked in a filing cabinet or protected by legal agreements. My knowledge, my vision, my ability to see possibilities where others saw only problems, those belong to me alone. Tyler called next, his message a strange mix of conciliatory and condescending. Jess, you're overreacting. Nobody's pushing you out. You're still vital to the company, just not in the top position. That doesn't mean you're not valued. I let his message go to voicemail. Some conversations weren't worth having. My final 2 weeks at Winters were surreal. I handed over all my current projects, briefed my team on outstanding matters, and documented everything meticulously. I didn't sabotage anything or leave loose ends. That wasn't my style. And despite everything, I still cared about the people who worked there. On my last day, Dad appeared in my office doorway as I was preparing to leave. He looked older somehow, uncertain in a way I wasn't used to seeing. You're really doing this, he said, not quite a question. I am. Where will you go? Forward, I replied simply. As I walked out of the building I had helped transform, carrying nothing but my personal notebook and a small box of mementos, I felt a strange mixture of grief and liberation. I was leaving behind a decade of work, relationships with colleagues I respected, and a company that, despite everything, I had loved. But for the first time since I'd returned to Charlotte with my ambitious plans, I felt truly free. Free from trying to prove my worth to people who would never fully see it. Free from contorting myself to fit into a role that had been designed to constrain rather than empower me. Free to create without compromise. I had no idea then just how far that freedom would take me, or that 5 years later, I would return, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a force that could no longer be denied. I left Winters Technical Materials on a Friday in early autumn, the Carolina air thick with possibility and change. By Monday morning, I had signed a lease on a small office space in Durham's Innovation District, a 3-hour drive from Charlotte, and the watchful eyes of my family. The space was modest, just 800 square feet with concrete floors, exposed brick walls, and windows that desperately needed cleaning. But it was mine, and that made all the difference. I named my new venture Genesis Textiles, a nod to beginnings, to creation, to starting something wholly new. For the first few months, Genesis consisted of just me, my laptop, and an industrial sewing machine I purchased secondhand. I started with consulting work to keep the lights on, offering my expertise to small apparel brands looking to improve their technical fabrics or sustainability practices. The work wasn't groundbreaking, but it paid the bills while I developed my real vision. Nights and weekends were dedicated to pure innovation. I didn't have the resources for a full research lab, but I had connections and creativity. I partnered with textile engineering professors at nearby Duke University, gaining access to their testing facilities in exchange for guest lectures and student mentorship. I reconnected with former classmates now working at global apparel companies, gathering insights about market gaps and emerging needs. My target wasn't to recreate what I'd built at Winters. That would be both legally problematic and creatively stagnant. Instead, I focused on a segment I had always wanted to explore, but Dad had dismissed as too niche, adaptive textiles that responded to environmental conditions or user needs, fabrics that could actively regulate temperature, adapt their structure based on movement patterns, or change properties in response to external stimuli. 6 months in, living on ramen noodles and determination, I developed my first prototype, a fabric that adjusted its insulation properties based on ambient temperature and the wearer's body heat. In cold conditions, the material's structure would shift to trap more air, providing greater warmth. In warm conditions, it would open up to allow maximum breathability. The true innovation wasn't just the temperature response. Others had worked on similar concepts, but the manufacturing process I developed that made it commercially viable at scale. I patented the process immediately, using my savings to cover the considerable legal fees. This time, my name would be the only one on the intellectual property. This time, nobody could tell me my creation wasn't worthy of investment or attention. With prototype in hand, I approached Meridian Outdoor, a mid-sized adventure apparel brand known for innovation but struggling to compete with industry giants. Their CEO, Alicia Rodriguez, was skeptical at first, as she should be of an unknown startup making big claims. But when she tested the prototype jacket I'd made using my adaptive fabric, her expression changed from doubt to intrigue. "This actually works," she said, moving from the air-conditioned conference room to the sunny outdoor patio and back again. "I can feel it adjusting. How are you achieving this without battery power or electronics?" "That's the proprietary part," I smiled. "But what matters is that it can be manufactured using modified versions of existing equipment, requires no special handling by consumers, and costs only about 20% more than standard performance fabrics." Alicia didn't commit immediately, but she assembled her technical team for a more thorough evaluation. 2 weeks later, Meridian placed their first order, small by industry standards, but transformative for Genesis. They wanted exclusive rights to the technology for their upcoming Alpine collection. "We can't offer what the big brands might," Alicia admitted during our contract negotiations. "But we can promise to showcase this technology properly, with the marketing it deserves." I accepted their terms, including a payment structure that was heavily weighted toward future royalties rather than upfront capital. It was a risk, but I believed in both my technology and Meridian's commitment to it. More importantly, I needed a manufacturing partner, and Meridian introduced me to their contract facility in Tennessee. That first production run nearly broke me, physically, emotionally, and financially. I spent weeks on site at the Tennessee factory, troubleshooting issues, training staff, and often working alongside them to ensure quality standards. When equipment needed modifications to handle my specialized fabric, I designed the changes myself and helped implement them. When the first batch failed quality testing, I stayed overnight redesigning the process until we got it right. One night, exhausted after a 16-hour day on the factory floor, I called the only person who might understand what I was going through. Not my father or brother, but my maternal grandmother, Eleanor, who had built her own small but successful interior design business in the 1960s when female entrepreneurs were even rarer than now. "I don't know if I can do this, Grandma," I confessed, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed that I'd barely seen in days. "Every time we solve one problem, 3 more appear. I've put everything into this, and if it fails—" "It won't fail because you won't let it," she interrupted firmly. "Your grandfather and father never understood what drives you, Jessica. They see ambition as a masculine trait, leadership as something that looks like them. But you come from my line too, and the women in my family don't need permission to be exceptional." Her words stayed with me through the challenging months that followed. When the first Meridian jackets featuring my technology finally hit the market, the response exceeded everyone's expectations. Adventure enthusiasts raved about the performance. Tech publications featured the innovation. Larger outdoor brands began making inquiries about licensing opportunities. By the end of my first year as an entrepreneur, Genesis had grown from a one-woman operation to a team of 5, including 2 textile engineers and a sustainability specialist. We had moved to a larger facility with a proper lab and small-scale production capabilities for prototyping. We had licensing agreements with 3 outdoor apparel brands and were in negotiations with a major athletic wear company. I didn't hear from my family during this time, though I occasionally saw press releases about Winter's technical materials. They had maintained the product lines I'd established but hadn't launched any significant innovations. Their stock price had plateaued, then begun a slow decline. Industry analysts noted their sudden lack of cutting-edge offerings and increasing similarity to offshore competitors. In my second year, Genesis experienced the breakthrough that would define our SUC's future. A medical research team at Johns Hopkins approached us about adapting our responsive textile technology for therapeutic applications. They were developing treatments for circulatory disorders and believed fabrics that could adjust compression levels based on body temperature might revolutionize care for certain conditions. The medical applications opened an entirely new direction for Genesis. We expanded our research team, bringing on biomedical engineers and healthcare specialists. We established strict testing protocols and began the lengthy process of medical device certification. The work was challenging but deeply meaningful, a perfect alignment of technical innovation and human impact. By year 3, Genesis had secured Series A funding, allowing us to build our own production facility in Durham. I designed the factory from the ground up, incorporating every efficiency and sustainability measure I had ever dreamed of implementing. Solar panels covered the roof. Closed-loop water systems eliminated wastewater. Modular production lines could be rapidly reconfigured for different products without downtime. Our workforce grew to 60 employees, many of them women and people of color, who had been overlooked by traditional textile manufacturers. I implemented policies that seemed radical in the industry but simply made sense to me. Generous parental leave, education reimbursement, profit sharing for all employees, and a 4-day work week that somehow increased productivity rather than reducing it. As Genesis approached its 4th anniversary, we had established ourselves as the industry leader in responsive textiles, with applications ranging from outdoor apparel to medical devices to military gear. Our annual revenue had reached $75 million, modest, compared to Winter's but extraordinary for a company our age and our industry. More importantly, we had a reputation for innovation that attracted the best talent and most interesting partnership opportunities. It was around this time that I received an unexpected email from my brother. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk." I nearly deleted it without reading further, but curiosity won out. The message inside was surprisingly brief. "Jess, things aren't good here. Dad won't admit it, but we're in trouble. Could we meet? Just the 2 of us." After deliberating, for days I agreed to a meeting, not at Winter's or at Genesis, but on neutral ground at a cafe in Greensboro, halfway between our respective companies. When I arrived, I was shocked by Tyler's appearance. My once polished brother looked exhausted, with shadows under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders I'd never seen before. "Thank you for coming," he said, lacking his usual confidence. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I replied honestly. "Why am I here, Tyler?" He took a deep breath. "Winter's is failing. We've lost 3 major clients in the past 6 months. Our medical division is being outperformed by competitors with more advanced materials. We've had to lay off nearly 100 people." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, surprised to find I genuinely meant it. Despite everything, I still cared about the company my grandfather had built and the people who worked there. "The problem is innovation," Tyler continued. "Or rather, our lack of it, after you left. We tried to maintain what you'd created, but none of us truly understood the research direction. Your team has done their best, but without you driving the vision." "So you want my advice?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "After telling me I wasn't leadership material?" Tyler had the grace to look ashamed. "That was Dad more than me. But yes, I went along with it. I thought running a company was about sales relationships and financial decisions. I didn't understand that without innovation, there's nothing to sell and no profits to manage. And now? Now I'm asking for help, he said simply. Not for me, but for the 500 families that depend on Winters for their livelihoods. For Grandpa's legacy. I sat back, studying my brother's face. There was a humility there I'd never seen before, a genuine concern that went beyond his own status or success. Still, I was wary. What exactly are you proposing? A partnership between Genesis and Winters, he said. We have scale and market presence. You have the innovation and vision. Together, we could be stronger than either company alone. The old Jessica might have jumped at this opportunity. A chance to return triumphantly to Winters, to prove her worth, to win the approval she'd been seeking for so long. But I wasn't that person anymore. I've built Genesis without compromise, I said carefully. We make decisions based on innovation potential and human impact, not quarterly profits. We have a culture of respect and collaboration that took years to establish. I won't sacrifice that. I'm not asking you to, Tyler insisted. I'm suggesting we find a way to bring the best of Genesis to Winters, not the other way around. I didn't commit to anything that day, but I agreed to consider his proposal and discuss it with my team. When I returned to Genesis and shared the conversation with my executive team, people I had hired specifically for their brilliance, integrity, and alignment with my vision, their reactions were mixed. My chief technology officer, a woman who had left a prestigious position at MIT to join Genesis, was immediately skeptical. They're desperate now, but once you've saved them, what's to prevent history from repeating itself? My operations director, who had previously worked at a company that went through a bad merger, warned about culture clash and the difficulty of integrating teams with different values and approaches. But my chief medical officer, who had seen firsthand the impact our therapeutic textiles were having on patients, offered a different perspective. If we could scale that impact through Winters' distribution channels and manufacturing capacity, we could help more people faster. Isn't that the point? I spent weeks analyzing options, conducting due diligence on Winters' current situation, and trying to determine if a partnership could work without compromising Genesis's identity and values. What I discovered was worse than Tyler had indicated. Winters wasn't just struggling, it was months away from potential bankruptcy. The innovations I had implemented had kept them competitive for a time, but without continued evolution, they had become increasingly irrelevant in a rapidly changing market. Dad had finally stepped back from day-to-day operations, but remained chairman of the board, still influencing major decisions. Tyler was doing his best as CEO, but lacked the technical background to lead innovation and had lost confidence after several failed initiatives. The company culture had deteriorated, with high turnover among talented staff and a growing sense of resignation among those who remained. After much consideration, I developed a counter-proposal, not a partnership or merger as Tyler had suggested, but an acquisition. Genesis would purchase Winters' technical materials, integrating the viable parts of the business while restructuring others. The terms were straightforward but non-negotiable. 1. I would serve as CEO of the combined entity, with Tyler transitioning to a role focusing on client relationships where his skills could be valuable. 2. The Genesis leadership team would remain intact, with authority to restructure Winters' departments as needed. 3. The Genesis name, culture, and values would be maintained, though we would preserve the Winters legacy through a dedicated product line. 4. No employee would lose their job due to the acquisition, though some might be retrained for different roles. 5. Dad would step down from the board entirely, serving only in an honorary advisory capacity with no decision-making authority. It was a bold proposal, essentially asking the Winters family to surrender control of the company they had run for generations. I expected resistance, particularly from Dad. What I didn't expect was to be invited to present my proposal at a formal board meeting with all members present, including my father. When I entered the Winters boardroom for the first time in 4 years, the atmosphere was tense but respectful. The board members, mostly longtime family friends and business associates, greeted me with a deference that would have been unimaginable during my previous tenure. Dad sat at the head of the table, looking older and more subdued than I remembered. Tyler sat to his right, while an empty chair waited for me on his left. "Jessica," Dad nodded as I took my seat. "Thank you for coming. Tyler tells me you have a proposal regarding the future of Winters." "I do," I replied, opening my presentation. I didn't waste time on pleasantries or reminiscence. I presented the facts clearly. Winters' declining market position, Genesis's rising trajectory, the complementary aspects of our technologies and manufacturing capabilities, and the terms under which I believed an acquisition could benefit both entities. When I reached the slide outlining the leadership structure, with myself as CEO and Dad stepping down from the board, I paused, expecting an explosion of objection. Instead, Dad simply looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Continue," he said quietly. I finished the presentation with financial projections showing how the combined company could not only recover, but grow substantially within 3 years, preserving jobs and creating new opportunities in the region. When I concluded, the room was silent for several moments. Finally, one board member, a venture capitalist who had invested in Winters' initial expansion, spoke up. "These projections assume successful integration of Genesis's innovation pipeline with Winters' manufacturing capacity. What makes you confident this can be achieved, given the history between the leadership teams?" It was a diplomatic way of addressing the elephant in the room. The fact that this same board had unanimously approved Dad's decision to make Tyler CEO over me 4 years earlier. "Because this time, the lines of authority will be clear," I answered calmly. "I'm not proposing to work within the existing structure that failed before. I'm proposing to implement the structure that has made Genesis successful, one based on expertise, collaboration, and clear vision rather than tradition or hierarchy." Another board member, one of Dad's oldest friends, turned to him. "James, you've been quiet. What are your thoughts on this proposal?" Dad straightened in his chair, looking directly at me for what felt like the first time in years. 4 years ago, I told Jessica she wasn't suited for leadership, that she was brilliant with innovation but lacked the qualities needed to run a company. He paused, his voice growing quieter. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air, unexpected and powerful. Genesis has achieved in 4 years what it took Winters' generations to build, Dad continued. Not just financial success, but a reputation for integrity and innovation that we've lost. That Jessica built that from nothing, after walking away with nothing, speaks to leadership abilities I failed to recognize. He turned to address the full board. I believe Jessica's proposal represents the best future for Winters, not just for survival, but for growth and renewed purpose. I recommend we accept her terms, including my own transition to an advisory role. The board voted unanimously to approve the acquisition. As the meeting concluded, people filed out until only Dad, Tyler, and I remained in the boardroom where so many decisions about my future had been made without my input. Why did you support my proposal? I asked Dad directly. It effectively ends your control of the company you've run for decades, Dad smiled sadly. Because I finally recognized that leadership isn't about control, it's about vision. It took watching you build something remarkable without my help, or my interference, to understand that. He stood, looking suddenly every one of his 73 years. I made a mistake, Jessica. One that cost this company dearly and nearly cost me my daughter. I'm trying to correct at least the first part. The second. That's up to you. It wasn't an explicit apology, but from a man who had never admitted error in his life, it was significant. I nodded, not quite ready to address the personal aspect of his statement. The transition team will be here next week to begin the integration process, I said, gathering my materials. We'll need full cooperation from all department heads. You'll have it, Tyler assured me. And Jessica, thank you for saving what Grandpa built, even when we didn't deserve your help. As I walked out of Winter's headquarters that day, I felt a strange sense of completion. I wasn't returning to reclaim what had been denied to me. I had built something far more valuable on my own terms. Instead, I was extending the success I had created to encompass the legacy that, despite everything, still mattered to me. The next 6 months were among the most challenging of my career. Integrating 2 companies with different cultures, technologies, and histories proved even more complicated than I had anticipated. There was resistance from some longtime Winters executives who resented the new leadership structure. There were technical incompatibilities between our systems that required creative solutions. There were tense moments when old wounds threatened to derail progress. But there were triumphs too. When we launched our first jointly developed product line, therapeutic compression garments that combined Genesis' responsive technology with Winters' scaled manufacturing capability, the market response was overwhelming. When we reopened a shuttered Winters facility with upgraded equipment and called back workers who had been laid off, the community celebration brought tears to my eyes. Dad kept his word, remaining available for historical context, but never interfering with my decisions. Tyler found his place leading a new business development team, where his relationship-building skills became a genuine asset, rather than a substitute for substantive leadership. And I discovered that running a larger, more complex organization didn't require me to compromise my values or vision. It simply gave me a bigger platform from which to implement them. A year after the acquisition, at the company's annual all-hands meeting, I stood on stage looking out at nearly 1,000 employees, people from both Genesis and Winters, who were now part of a single thriving entity. When I started Genesis, I told them, it was because I believed innovation wasn't just about new products, but new ways of thinking, working, and leading. I believed we could build a company that valued expertise over hierarchy, impact over tradition, and people over profits. Today, standing before all of you, I see that vision realized on a scale I once only dreamed of. I gestured to where Dad sat in the front row, more at peace than I'd seen him in years. We honor our history by building on it, not by being constrained by it. The legacy of Winters continues, not because we clung to what was, but because we had the courage to evolve into what could be. As the applause washed over me, I realized that the true measure of leadership isn't a title or position. It's the ability to envision something better than what exists, and the determination to make that vision reality, regardless of who believes in you. Sometimes the most powerful choice you can make isn't fighting harder for recognition within a system that doesn't value you. Sometimes it's walking away and building something so extraordinary they have no choice but to see your worth. The quiet ones, the detail-oriented ones, the ones who express themselves through creation rather than domination. We aren't just supporting characters in someone else's narrative. We're the architects of the future, whether others recognize it or not. And sometimes, if we're fortunate, we get to write endings more healing and triumphant than we could have imagined when our stories began. 2 years after the acquisition, Genesis Winters had become a case study taught in business schools across the country. Industry analysts praised our seamless integration of innovation and scale, while sustainability advocates highlighted our commitment to environmental responsibility and ethical manufacturing. Our revenue had not only stabilized, but grown to $800 million annually, with projections to cross the billion-dollar threshold within 18 months. But success at this level brought new challenges, ones I hadn't anticipated when running either company independently. Larger competitors began taking notice of our growth, some approaching with partnership offers and others with thinly veiled threats of patent challenges. International markets that had previously seemed distant now represented crucial expansion opportunities, requiring navigation of complex regulatory environments and cultural differences. Investors and financial analysts scrutinized our every move, creating pressure for consistent quarterly growth that sometimes conflicted with our long-term innovation goals. I found myself spending more time in boardrooms and less in research labs, more hours with lawyers and accountants than with engineers and designers. While I had assembled an exceptional leadership team that shared my values and vision, I still felt the weight of final decisions resting squarely on my shoulders. The scale of responsibility was both exhilarating and exhausting. One particularly challenging week found me in back-to-back meetings from dawn until well past dusk for 5 consecutive days. On Friday evening, as I finally prepared to leave the office, I noticed a light still on in my father's advisory office down the hall. Since the acquisition, Dad had maintained a small workspace at headquarters, available for consultation on historical matters, but carefully respectful of my authority as CEO. Our relationship had evolved into something cautiously cordial. Not the closeness we'd had when I was a child, but not the strained silence of my departure years earlier. I hesitated, then walked to his open door and knocked lightly on the frame. Dad looked up from the historical sales reports he was reviewing, seeming surprised to see me. "Jessica," he nodded. "Working late?" "Always," I smiled slightly. "You too, it seems." "Just nostalgia, really," he admitted, gesturing to the reports. "Looking at how the industry has changed over the decades, textile manufacturing today bears little resemblance to what my father taught me." I stepped into the office, drawn by a rare moment of reflective openness from a man who had always faced forward, never dwelling on the past. "What do you think Grandpa would make of Genesis Winters now?" Dad considered this question seriously. He'd be amazed by the technology, certainly. Fabrics that change properties based on body temperature would have seemed like science fiction to him. He paused, a slight smile crossing his face. "But I think he'd recognize your determination. That hasn't changed since his day. The drive to create something meaningful, to build something that lasts." "You never told me much about him as a person," I said, realizing how little I knew about the man whose legacy had shaped so much of my life. Only as a businessman. Dad leaned back in his chair, his expression softening with memory. "He wasn't someone who talked about his feelings easily, like me, I suppose. But he showed what mattered through actions. During economic downturns, he'd cut his own salary before laying off a single worker. During the energy crisis in the 70s, he retrofitted the entire factory for efficiency when competitors were moving production overseas to save costs. I sat in the chair across from him, struck by parallels I'd never considered. "Those sound like decisions I would make." "Yes," Dad agreed quietly. "More like you than like me." I've had time to think about that since the acquisition. How I tried to mold the company in my image, rather than seeing it could evolve into something better. He met my eyes directly. "Something you always saw." The acknowledgement hung between us, neither apology nor absolution, but something important nonetheless. Before I could respond, my phone chimed with an urgent message from our head of R&D, requesting my input on a technical issue with our newest product line. "Duty calls," I said, standing. Dad nodded. "It always does. That's leadership." The conversation lingered with me throughout the weekend as I worked remotely from my lakefront home. The property was my one significant personal indulgence after Genesis became profitable, a modern glass and cedar retreat set on 10 wooded acres, with a private dock extending into the clear waters. The architecture featured clean lines and abundant natural light, with my home office positioned to capture panoramic views of the water and surrounding forest. It was my sanctuary, the place where vision and innovation flowed most freely. That Sunday, as spring sunshine sparkled on the lake's surface, I found myself sketching ideas for a new direction in responsive textiles, materials that could not just react to environmental conditions, but actively generate energy from them. Solar-responsive fibers that could harvest light while providing UV protection. Kinetic elements that could capture energy from body movement to power small medical monitoring devices embedded in therapeutic garments. The concepts were ambitious, pushing beyond the boundaries of current textile technology into something that might genuinely change how people interacted with their clothing and the world around them. As I worked, I realized I hadn't felt this creatively energized in months, possibly years. The day-to-day demands of running a large corporation had gradually pulled me away from the hands-on innovation that had always been my passion and strength. Monday morning arrived with a calendar full of financial reviews and quarterly planning sessions. Necessary aspects of leadership, but far removed from the creative work that had filled my weekend. As I prepared for the first meeting, a notification appeared on my screen. An industry news alert about Nexus Innovations, one of our main competitors, launching a new line of temperature-adaptive fabrics remarkably similar to those we had pioneered years earlier. Our legal team would need to review for potential patent infringement, of course, but the development highlighted a growing concern. Large competitors with deeper pockets were beginning to crowd into the space we had created. Some were developing legitimate innovations of their own, while others were producing close imitations of our technologies, just different enough to avoid clear legal challenges. The market we had once defined was becoming increasingly competitive. During that morning's executive committee meeting, our CFO presented projections showing a potential flattening of growth if we maintained our current course. "We're reaching market saturation in our core segments," she explained. "To maintain our growth trajectory, we either need to diversify into adjacent markets, significantly expand internationally, or develop breakthrough technologies that create entirely new categories." As the team discussed options, I found my thoughts returning to the energy-generating textile concepts I'd been exploring over the weekend. Not just an incremental improvement to our existing lines, but a fundamental shift in how textiles functioned, from passive materials to active systems that could generate and utilize energy. "There may be a fourth option," I said, interrupting a debate about Asian market expansion. "What if textiles could become energy sources themselves?" My Chief Technology Officer, Dr. Lydia Chen, immediately grasped the concept. "You're talking about moving beyond responsive fabrics to generative ones." Exactly, not just adapting to conditions, but harvesting energy from them, solar, kinetic, even thermal differential. The room fell silent as the implications registered. Our head of strategy was the first to voice concern. Development costs for something that revolutionary would be astronomical. We'd need expertise beyond textiles, electronics, power management, material science beyond what we currently employ. And regulatory hurdles would be complex, added our legal counsel, particularly for medical applications. They were right, of course. What I was proposing would require unprecedented investment in R&D, new talent acquisition, and years of development before commercialization. Wall Street would question such a long-term play without immediate returns. The board might balk at the risk. "We should explore traditional growth strategies alongside this concept," our COO suggested diplomatically. "International expansion and adjacent markets provide more certain returns in the near term." I nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in his caution. By the meeting's end, we had assigned teams to develop proposals for each growth path, including my more experimental direction. But as executives filed out, I could sense their skepticism about the energy-generating textiles concept, not about its potential, but about its practical viability in our current corporate structure. That evening, I requested a comprehensive analysis of our company's innovation pipeline compared to our growing administrative and operational demands. The results were sobering. Over the past 2 years, Our R&D investment as a percentage of revenue had actually decreased, while our administrative headcount had grown considerably. The larger we became, the more resources we devoted to maintaining existing operations rather than creating the next breakthrough. This pattern wasn't unique to us. It was the natural evolution of successful companies as they scaled. But it represented a fundamental threat to what had made Genesis special from the beginning. We were becoming exactly the kind of slow-moving, incrementalist organization I had left Winters to escape. For 3 days, I immersed myself in strategic analysis, reviewing every aspect of our operation and contemplating various restructuring options. I consulted with board members individually, testing different approaches to balancing short-term market expectations with long-term innovation goals. The conversations were productive, but ultimately unsatisfying. Each path forward seemed to require compromise of either our financial stability or our innovative spirit. On the 4th day, I cleared my calendar and drove to the mountains, seeking perspective in the ancient forests and rushing streams of the Blue Ridge Parkway. As I hiked alone along a secluded trail, my phone deliberately left in the car. Clarity began to emerge, not as a flash of insight, but as a gradual recognition of what I had always known but had been reluctant to acknowledge. Genesis Winters had become too large and complex for a single vision to guide it effectively. The very success we had achieved now constrained us with expectations of predictable growth and return on investment. To preserve the spirit of innovation that had driven me from the beginning, something would need to change fundamentally. By the time I returned to my car, I had the outline of a plan, one that would be controversial, unexpected, and potentially transformative for both the company and my own future. Back at my lake house that evening, I sketched the framework for what I called Project Liberty, then sent a message to our board chair requesting a special closed session the following week. The boardroom was unusually quiet as I presented my proposal. No executive team members were present, just the board of directors and myself, the atmosphere tense with anticipation. Genesis Winters stands at a pivotal moment, I began. We've achieved remarkable success by any traditional metric: market leadership, consistent profitability, industry recognition. But there's a growing misalignment between our structure and our purpose. I displayed slides showing our declining rate of breakthrough innovation despite increased overall R&D spending, the lengthening time between major product launches, and the growing competitive pressure from both established players and agile startups. What I'm proposing isn't a traditional restructuring or strategic pivot, I continued. It's a deliberate fission, splitting Genesis Winters into 2 distinct entities, each focused on what it does best. The concept was elegant in theory, though complex in execution. Winters Manufacturing would continue as a publicly traded company focusing on scaled production of established technologies, leveraging our manufacturing excellence and global distribution channels. Genesis Innovation would become a privately held R&D incubator focused exclusively on developing revolutionary technologies, including my vision for energy-generating textiles, without the constraints of quarterly earnings expectations. The 2 entities would maintain a privileged relationship, I explained. Genesis would license successful innovations to Winters for commercialization, while Winters would provide manufacturing expertise and market access to Genesis. Each would be governed independently but aligned through long-term partnership agreements. And leadership? Our board chair asked, his expression carefully neutral. Winters Manufacturing would benefit from professional management experienced in running mature public companies. I would step down as CEO to lead Genesis Innovation. The statement produced exactly the reaction I had anticipated: surprise, bordering on shock. For the past several years, I had been the face and voice of Genesis Winters, the architect of its success and growth. My departure from the CEO role would be seen as a seismic shift both internally and in the market. You're proposing to walk away from the company you built into an industry leader, one director said incredulously, to start over with what amounts to a research lab. I'm proposing to ensure both entities thrive by focusing on their core strengths, I corrected gently. Winters needs leadership suited to its scale and public market responsibilities. Genesis needs the freedom to create without quarterly earnings pressure. Questions followed about financial structures, shareholder value, transition timing, legal complexities. I had anticipated most and had prepared detailed responses with the help of trusted advisors consulted under strict confidentiality. But the fundamental question came from our most senior board member, a retired CEO who had mentored me informally over the years. "Jessica," he said quietly after others had exhausted their technical inquiries, "this is clearly well considered from a business perspective. But I have to ask, is this what you truly want? You fought so hard to build this company, to prove your leadership, and now you're choosing to step back from that position of authority." I appreciated his directness and the genuine concern behind his question. "I'm not stepping back," I replied with conviction. "I'm stepping forward into what has always driven me: creation, innovation, solving problems that others haven't even recognized yet. The CEO role has given me tremendous opportunity and platform, but it's also increasingly separated me from the work that gives me purpose." I looked around the table at each board member. I built Genesis to create something meaningful, not to occupy a particular title. This restructuring allows both aspects of our company to flourish authentically rather than constraining each other. Winters can focus on execution excellence without apology, and Genesis can pursue breakthrough innovation without quarterly growth pressure. Deliberations continued for hours, with financial advisors and legal counsel eventually joining to address specific technical questions. By day's end, the board had agreed to form a special committee to evaluate the proposal in detail, with a target to reach a decision within 30 days. News of the potential restructuring remained confidential during the evaluation period, limited to the board and a small team of senior executives and advisors brought in to help develop the implementation plan. The secrecy was necessary, but created a strange disconnect as I continued leading the company publicly while privately planning its transformation. My father was among the first outside the board I chose to inform, inviting him to my lake house one evening in late spring. As we sat on the deck watching sunset paint the water with gold and crimson, I outlined the restructuring plan and my reasons for initiating it. Dad listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he remained silent for several minutes, considering my words while the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. 20 years ago, I wouldn't have understood this decision, he finally said. I would have seen only the prestige and control you're voluntarily relinquishing, not the vision you're pursuing. He turned to face me directly. But I've watched you build something extraordinary by following your instincts rather than conventional wisdom. I've learned, belatedly, to trust your judgment about your own path. Even when it means undoing the acquisition that brought Winters back from the brink? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. It's not undoing, he corrected me. It's evolution. Winters will continue with a secure future and clear purpose. What you've built won't disappear. It will transform into something more suited to its components. He smiled slightly. Believe it or not, I understand the desire to create rather than merely administer. I felt it myself once, before the pressures of running the family business overshadowed everything else. His words carried a wistfulness I'd rarely heard from him, a glimpse of a different path he might have taken in another life. What would you have created if you hadn't inherited Grandpa's company? I asked. Boats, he answered without hesitation. Custom wooden sailboats. I apprenticed with a boat builder one summer in college, before my father called me back to learn the family business. He gazed out at the lake, where my small sailboat was tethered at the dock. There's something about shaping wood into something that works with the natural forces of wind and water, something that can't be matched by managing spreadsheets and supplier contracts. The revelation surprised me. Not just the specific interest, but the fact that he had harbored this private passion through decades of practical business leadership. It cast our family history in a new light, suggesting that perhaps the expectations placed on me weren't unique to my generation or gender, but part of a longer pattern of duty overshadowing desire. "You should build one," I said impulsively. "Now that you're mostly retired, turn that boathouse at your property into a workshop." He chuckled. "Maybe I will. Old dogs, new tricks, and all that." His expression grew serious again. "But we're talking about your future, not mine. Are you certain about this path? The board will eventually agree. They respect you too much to block what you clearly want. But once announced, there's no easy way back." "I'm certain," I replied without hesitation. "I've spent years proving I could lead at the highest level. That was necessary, both for myself and for others who might follow a similar path. But now I have the freedom to choose what leadership means for me, on my own terms." 27 days after my initial board presentation, the special committee returned with their recommendation. Proceed with the restructuring plan with minor modifications to the financial structure and implementation timeline. The full board approved the recommendation unanimously, setting in motion the complex process of splitting a unified company into two distinct entities while preserving their symbiotic relationship. The public announcement came on a Tuesday morning. In July, I personally presented the plan at a press conference, explaining the rationale for separation and the unique partnership model we were pioneering. Financial analysts reacted with initial skepticism, questioning whether the split would destroy shareholder value rather than enhance it. Industry observers speculated about whether I was being forced out rather than choosing a different path. Competitors sensed potential disruption and began circling, approaching our key clients and employees with promises of stability. Through the maelstrom of external reaction, I maintained a clear and consistent message. This restructuring represented strength through specialization, not retreat or failure. In private meetings with major shareholders, I detailed how the separation would allow each entity to optimize its operations and capital structure for its specific mission. In town halls with employees, I addressed fears about job security and cultural change, emphasizing that both companies would maintain our core values while adapting their processes to their distinct purposes. The implementation process was exhausting, legally complex, emotionally charged, and logistically challenging. Determining which intellectual property, personnel, and resources would align with which entity required thousands of individual decisions, each with potential long-term consequences. Throughout the 6-month transition period, I continued leading the unified company while simultaneously building the foundation for Genesis innovation and helping identify and recruit the right leadership team for Winters Manufacturing. The candidate we ultimately selected as the new CEO of Winters was Diana Martinez, a seasoned executive with experience managing global manufacturing operations in adjacent industries. She brought a straightforward leadership style, deep operational expertise, and genuine respect for the culture we had built. Most importantly, she understood and embraced the unique relationship that would exist between Winters and Genesis, seeing it as a competitive advantage rather than a limitation. As the separation date approached, I found myself working closely with Diana to ensure a smooth transition. We spent long hours reviewing the company's operations, strategic initiatives, and cultural touchstones. During one such session, as we pored over manufacturing capacity plans late into the evening, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Why did you really choose to make this change? The official reasons make sense on paper, but this feels more personal than strategic." I considered deflecting with the polished explanation I'd provided to analysts and reporters, but something about her direct approach invited honesty. "Because I realized I was becoming what I had once rebelled against," I admitted. "Running." A large corporation requires a certain conformity, even when you're the one who built it. I found myself making safer choices, pursuing predictable growth rather than transformative innovation. That's not why I started Genesis. Diana nodded thoughtfully. Most founders don't recognize that evolution until it's too late, until they've been pushed out or the company has lost its edge. You saw it while still at your peak. That's rare. It wasn't an easy decision, I acknowledged. There's security in scale, prestige in the CEO title, but there's freedom in focus. Freedom to build energy-generating textiles? She smiled, referencing the ambitious project that would become Genesis Innovation's first major initiative. Among other things, I smiled back. Ideas that might seem too risky or distant for a public company with quarterly earnings expectations, but that could fundamentally change how people interact with the materials that surround them every day. On January 15th, the separation became official. Genesis Winters ceased to exist as a unified entity, replaced by Winters Manufacturing, Inc., publicly traded under the symbol WMI, and Genesis Innovation Group, privately held, with ownership, distributed among key researchers, strategic partners, and myself as majority stakeholder. The market reacted positively to the final structure, with Winters stock rising 7% on the first day of independent trading. I marked the transition privately, watching the sunrise from my dock on the lake rather than attending the ceremonial, bell ringing at the stock exchange. As dawn light filtered through morning mist rising from the water, I felt a profound sense of rightness, not triumph or vindication, but alignment between my deepest values and my daily work. Later that morning, I drove to Genesis Innovation's new headquarters, a renovated textile mill from the 1920s that we had carefully modernized while preserving its industrial character. The building housed research laboratories, prototyping, facilities, and collaborative spaces designed to foster creativity and cross-disciplinary interaction. The team was small but extraordinary. 37 scientists, engineers, and designers recruited from leading research institutions and innovative companies worldwide, each drawn by the opportunity to work on transformative technologies without corporate constraints. As I walked through the open central atrium, team members paused their work to applaud spontaneously. The gesture was unexpected and touching, acknowledgement not of title or authority, but of the vision we now had the freedom to pursue together. "Welcome to day one," Dr. Chen said, joining me at the building's central staircase. Or perhaps day 1000, depending on how you count. Both accurate in their way, I smiled. But today feels different, like removing training wheels or stepping out of shallow water into the deep. "And the first project?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Energy generating." "Textiles," I confirmed. "We start immediately with 3 parallel research tracks. I've secured initial partnerships with MIT's Materials Science Department and Stanford's Energy Systems Lab. We'll need to expand our team with specialists in nanoscale conductivity and power storage." Dr. Chen nodded, her expression reflecting the same excitement I felt. "Ambitious timeline?" 3 years to functional prototype, 5 to commercial application, I replied. "Impossible by conventional standards, but that's why we're here." As we walked toward the main research lab to meet with the team, I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of proving myself, to my father, to the industry, perhaps even to myself, had finally lifted. I was no longer defined by overcoming past limitations or matching someone else's definition of success. I had built a global manufacturing leader from a struggling family business, then voluntarily stepped away from its helm to return to creation and innovation. The path hadn't been linear or predictable, but it had led exactly where I needed to be. Not at the top of an existing hierarchy, but at the foundation of something entirely new. The Genesis Innovation team gathered around the central project table, eyes bright with possibility, minds already racing with ideas and approaches. As I outlined my vision for textiles that could harvest energy from the environment and the human body, I recognized that this moment represented the truest form of leadership, not controlling or directing, but inspiring and enabling, creating the conditions for collective genius to flourish. We're going to change how the world thinks about textiles, I told them. Not just what they do, but what they are. From passive materials to active systems that generate and utilize energy. I smiled, feeling the familiar thrill of a challenging problem awaiting solution. Let's get started. 5 years passed with a speed that surprised even me. During that time, Genesis Innovation grew from our initial team of 37 researchers to a dynamic organization of over 100 scientists, engineers, and designers, united by a shared mission to revolutionize textile technology. We remained deliberately small compared to Winter's manufacturing, which under Diana Martinez's leadership had expanded to employ nearly 2,000 people across multiple production facilities. While Winters focused on scale and efficiency, Genesis cultivated depth and discovery, two distinct approaches that complemented each other perfectly through our ongoing partnership. The promise of energy-generating textiles proved even more challenging than we had anticipated. Early prototypes achieved impressive results in laboratory settings, but struggled with durability in real-world applications. Solar-responsive fibers degraded after repeated laundering. Kinetic harvesting elements proved too fragile for everyday wear. Thermal differential systems couldn't generate consistent power outputs across varying environmental conditions. Each setback led to new approaches and innovations, but the timeline stretched beyond our initial projections. I remained deeply involved in the technical work, spending more time in the research labs than in my modest office. My hands regularly carried the stains of experimental dyes and conductive materials, my desk covered with fabric swatches and circuit diagrams rather than financial reports. This direct engagement wasn't just personal preference, it was necessary for the kind of breakthrough innovation we pursued. When designing materials that had never existed before, theoretical knowledge needed to be balanced with tactile understanding, with the intuitive grasp of how fibers behaved under various conditions. While the energy-generating textile project progressed more slowly than hoped, other Genesis innovations found more immediate applications. We developed biodegradable technical fabrics that maintained high performance while decomposing completely within 5 years, addressing growing concerns about microplastic pollution from synthetic textiles. Our adaptive insulation system that maintained optimal thermal regulation without external power sources transformed cold weather gear for outdoor enthusiasts and expedition teams working in extreme environments. A proprietary antimicrobial treatment derived from natural enzymes revolutionized medical textiles, reducing hospital-acquired infections without contributing to antibiotic resistance. Each successful innovation followed the model we had established at separation. Genesis developed and patented the core technology, then licensed it to Winters Manufacturing for scaled production and market distribution. The arrangement provided Genesis with reliable revenue streams to fund ongoing research, while giving Winters a constant pipeline of cutting-edge products that maintained their market leadership position. Diana and I maintained a strong collaborative relationship, meeting monthly to align our respective organizations' priorities and address any points of friction in our partnership. My father, true to his unexpected revelation years earlier, had indeed converted his lakeside boathouse into a workshop and begun building custom wooden sailboats. What started as a retirement hobby gradually evolved into a small but respected, bespoke boat-building operation with a 2-year waiting list for his handcrafted vessels. I visited his workshop occasionally, finding a quiet pleasure in watching his weathered hands shape wood with the same precision and care I brought to textile innovation. We didn't speak often of the past, of his earlier dismissal of my leadership, potential, or my subsequent departure from the family business, but a new understanding had grown between us, a mutual respect for the creative drive that manifested differently across generations. Tyler had found his own path as well, establishing a specialized consulting firm that helped traditional manufacturers navigate digital transformation. His natural relationship-building abilities, once miscast as leadership qualifications at Winters, proved perfectly suited to helping resistant executives understand and embrace necessary change. Somewhat ironically, he had become an advocate for exactly the kind of innovation he had once resisted, having learned firsthand the consequences of complacency in a rapidly evolving industry. Our family dynamics had settled into something that, while not conventionally close, felt authentic and appropriate. Professional respect layered over the complicated history we shared. Occasional family gatherings marked by cautious warmth rather than the tension of unspoken expectations and disappointments. We had each found our proper place, not through adherence to predetermined roles or traditions, but through the more difficult and rewarding process of self-discovery and honest reckoning with our true strengths and desires. The breakthrough with energy-generating textiles came unexpectedly, not through our primary research tracks, but through an adjacent project examining piezoelectric properties in cellulose nanofibers. Dr. Meera Patel, a brilliant material scientist who had joined Genesis from MIT 3 years earlier, discovered that certain crystalline structures formed under specific processing conditions could generate measurable electrical currents when subjected to minimal mechanical stress, essentially converting the natural movement of fabric during wear into small but consistent electrical energy. The discovery itself represented just the beginning. Adapting the principle into a commercially viable textile required 18 months of intensive development, addressing challenges of scalability, durability, and power management. The resulting material, which we named Voltex, could generate approximately 3 watts per square meter during normal movement, sufficient to power small medical monitoring devices, integrated LED lighting systems, or minimal heating elements without batteries or external power sources. When we finally achieved a stable, reproducible prototype suitable for commercial development, I invited Diana to witness the first full demonstration at Genesis headquarters. She arrived on a crisp autumn morning, her professional demeanor betraying little of her awareness that this moment represented the culmination of the vision I had articulated years earlier when proposing our corporate separation. Dr. Patel led the presentation, explaining the scientific principles while a diverse group of Genesis team members modeled prototype garments incorporating Voltex technology, athletic wear that powered integrated heart rate and performance monitors without batteries, a medical compression sleeve that delivered therapeutic microcurrents to damaged tissues, accelerating healing while monitoring recovery progress, a children's jacket with embedded safety lights that illuminated automatically in low-light conditions, powered entirely by the child's movement. The applications extend far beyond what we're demonstrating today, Dr. Patel explained, her normally reserved manner animated by genuine excitement. We've essentially created textiles that function as distributed power generation systems, harvesting energy that would otherwise be lost and putting it to practical use. Initial testing indicates the power generation capability remains stable through at least 500 wash cycles, with minimal degradation thereafter. Diana observed silently, her expression thoughtful as she examined each prototype and asked occasional clarifying questions about manufacturing requirements and scalability considerations. When the presentation concluded, she requested a moment alone with me, and we walked together to my office overlooking the research labs below. "This changes everything," she said simply, once the door closed behind us. "Not just for Winters and Genesis, but for the entire concept of what textiles can be." I nodded, allowing myself to acknowledge the magnitude of what we had achieved. It's still early. Commercial production will present new challenges we haven't anticipated. Consumer adoption may take time. But yes, I believe this fundamentally alters the relationship between textiles and technology. "How soon can we begin production planning?" Diana asked, her mind already shifting to implementation. "Our major clients will want exclusivity arrangements once this becomes public." We should prepare for significant capacity expansion. 3 months for initial production-ready specifications, I replied, but I'd suggest a phased approach, starting with medical applications where the value proposition is clearest, then expanding to athletic and safety applications as we refine the technology and build consumer awareness. Diana agreed with the strategy, and we spent the next hour outlining the broad parameters of our implementation plan, technical documentation requirements, production facility modifications, initial market targeting, and intellectual property protection measures. Throughout the discussion, I felt a growing sense of symmetry, of completion of a circle that had begun when I first returned to Winters Fabrics, with ambitious ideas that my father and brother couldn't comprehend. "You know," Diana said as our meeting concluded, "when you appointed me to lead Winters, many industry observers predicted failure. They saw the separation as abandoning a successful integration, returning to outdated models of research production division." She smiled slightly. 5 years later, Winters' market capitalization has tripled, and now we're preparing to launch technology that competitors will spend years trying to replicate. Your vision was correct, though not in the way most people understood at the time. Not just my vision, I corrected her. What we've accomplished, both organizations, resulted from allowing people to work in environments suited to their strengths and purposes. Scientists and engineers need different structures and incentives than production specialists and operational experts. It was a lesson I had learned through direct experience, through being forced into roles that didn't align with my natural abilities, and then creating spaces where both I and others could contribute authentically. The journey from overlooked operations director to CEO to founder of Genesis Innovation hadn't been linear or predictable, but each stage had provided essential insights that shaped how I understood leadership and organization. The commercial launch of Voltex technology, coordinated jointly by Genesis and Winters, generated interest beyond anything we had experienced previously. Medical device manufacturers, athletic apparel brands, military contractors, and consumer electronics companies all recognized the transformative potential of textiles that could generate their own power. Within 6 months of the announcement, our licensing agreements for the technology exceeded $400 million in value, with implementation timelines stretching over the next 3 years. As media attention intensified, I found myself increasingly pulled from the research work I valued into the public-facing role of innovation spokesperson. Interview requests arrived daily from business publications, technology journals, and general interest media. Industry conferences requested keynote addresses on the future of smart textiles. Universities offered visiting professorships and honorary degrees. The recognition was gratifying but also distracting. Each hour spent explaining our work to others was an hour not spent advancing it. One particularly persistent journalist, Sophia Reyes from the Technology Innovator, requested an in-depth profile that would trace my journey from the family business to the cutting edge of textile technology. After declining twice, I reluctantly agreed when she positioned the story as inspiration for young women considering careers in traditionally male-dominated fields like textile manufacturing and materials science. The interview took place at Genesis headquarters, beginning with a tour of our research facilities and demonstrations of our key technologies. As we settled into my office for the formal interview portion, Sophia's first question surprised me with its directness. "You walked away from being CEO of a $500 million company to start what was essentially a research lab," she began. Many people would consider that career suicide, or at minimum, a significant step backward. Did you doubt that decision at any point over the past 5 years? I considered the question seriously, appreciating that she hadn't begun with the more predictable inquiries about being a woman in a male-dominated industry. "No," I replied finally. "Not because the path was always clear or easy, but because the alignment between my work and my deepest values provided a certainty that transcended conventional metrics of success. Those conventional metrics, title, organizational size, compensation, They matter to most people, Sophia pressed. Were you somehow immune to their pull? Not immune, I smiled. Just inoculated through experience. I had achieved those external markers, the C-suite office, the large organization, the industry recognition, and discovered they didn't correlate with fulfillment or even with impact. Some people need that direct experience to understand what truly matters to them. I was fortunate to have it relatively early in my career. The conversation continued, covering my technical background, the science behind Voltex, and our research methodology at Genesis. But Sophia returned repeatedly to the personal aspects of my journey, particularly the dynamics with my father and brother that had shaped my early career. Your father essentially dismissed your leadership potential, choosing your brother for the CEO role despite your contributions to the company's success, she said. Many women would view your subsequent achievements as vindication or even revenge. Is that how you see it? The question struck a deeper chord than I had expected, prompting me to consider how my perspective had evolved over the years. Initially, perhaps there was an element of wanting to prove him wrong, I acknowledged. But revenge is ultimately empty. It keeps you tethered to the past, to other people's judgments and limitations. I paused, trying to articulate the transformation that had occurred so gradually I had barely noticed it happening. At some point, I stopped measuring my success against others' expectations or perceptions. Genesis isn't successful because it proves my father was wrong about me. It's successful because it's the authentic expression of my vision and abilities, unconstrained by frameworks that were never designed to accommodate them. Do you think he recognizes that now? Sophia asked. I think he recognizes something more important, I replied. That his own life might have been different if he hadn't been constrained by inherited expectations about what success should look like. He builds boats now, beautiful, handcrafted wooden sailboats. It's what he always wanted to do but set aside to run the family business as his father expected. I smiled slightly. Sometimes the lessons we teach each other aren't the ones we intended. The profile, when published, generated more attention than I had anticipated, resonating particularly with women in STEM fields and entrepreneurs who had chosen unconventional paths. The narrative Sophia crafted wasn't the simplistic woman proves doubters wrong story I had feared, but a more nuanced exploration of authenticity, purpose, and the courage to define success on one's own terms. 2 months after the article's publication, I received an unexpected visitor at Genesis headquarters. My assistant interrupted an afternoon research meeting to inform me that Catherine Chen, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, was in our reception area requesting a brief conversation. Surprised but intrigued, I excused myself from the meeting and went to greet her. Secretary Chen, a former technology executive known for her pragmatic approach to innovation policy, explained that she was visiting the region and had been following Genesis's work with interest. After a brief tour of our facilities, she invited me to join a newly formed National Advisory Council on American Manufacturing Innovation, a small group of industry leaders and technical experts tasked with developing recommendations for strengthening America's manufacturing competitiveness through advanced technology adoption. We need voices like yours, she explained as we discussed the opportunity. People who understand both the technical and human elements of innovation, how to create environments where breakthrough thinking can flourish while maintaining connections to practical implementation. The invitation represented an opportunity to influence national policy on issues I cared deeply about: research funding, technical education, sustainable manufacturing practices, and the future of American textile production. After consulting with Dr. Patel and our leadership team about the time commitment involved, I accepted the appointment, beginning a new chapter that would further expand my understanding of how innovation ecosystems functioned at a national scale. Over the next 2 years, my role on the Advisory Council connected me with remarkable leaders across diverse industries, aerospace engineers developing new composite materials, semiconductor pioneers pushing the boundaries of computational capability, biotech researchers creating sustainable alternatives to petrochemical products. Despite our different technical domains, we shared common challenges in nurturing innovation while addressing practical constraints of regulation, workforce development, and global competition. Through these interactions, I began developing a framework for what I called purpose-centered innovation, an approach that aligned technical advances with meaningful human and environmental outcomes rather than pursuing technology for its own sake. The framework emphasized three core principles: authentic problem identification based on deep understanding of user needs, interdisciplinary collaboration that combined diverse knowledge domains, and ethical consideration of social and ecological impacts throughout the development process. I tested these principles within Genesis, restructuring our research programs to begin explicitly with questions of purpose and impact before advancing to technical solutions. Our innovation pipeline became more focused but also more ambitious, targeting challenges where textile technology could address significant human needs, protective garments that could detect and neutralize environmental toxins for first responders, therapeutic fabrics that accelerated wound healing for burn victims, low-cost water filtration textiles for regions facing water insecurity. As Genesis approached its 8th anniversary, I found myself in a leadership position I had never anticipated. When walking away from the CEO role at Genesis Winters, I led a globally recognized innovation organization, advised national policy on manufacturing technology, and increasingly served as a mentor to young women pursuing careers in technical fields. Yet I remained most fulfilled by the hands-on work of creation, the collaborative process of bringing new materials into existence, of solving technical problems that had never been addressed before. This balance between external impact and internal fulfillment, between organizational leadership and technical contribution, represented the resolution of tensions that had shaped my earlier career. I no longer needed to choose between being recognized as a leader and honored as an innovator. I had created a context where these aspects of my professional identity could coexist and reinforce each other rather than competing for primacy. On a crisp autumn morning, 8 years after Genesis Innovations' formation, I arrived at our headquarters to find the research team gathered in the central atrium, an unusual departure from our normal routine. Dr. Patel stepped forward as I entered, a barely contained smile suggesting something significant had occurred. "We achieved full integration," she announced simply. I understood immediately the meaning of those 3 words. For the past 18 months, a specialized team had been working on what we called the Nexus Project, the seamless integration of our energy-generating Voltex technology with advanced microelectronics, creating textiles that functioned as complete, computational systems rather than merely power sources for external devices. We had been making steady progress, but full integration, where the textile itself served as both power generator and functional electronic device, had remained elusive due to challenges of durability, consistent connectivity, and heat management. Achieving this milestone represented not just an incremental improvement, but a paradigm shift in how we conceptualized the relationship between textiles and technology. "Show me," I said, following Dr. Patel and the team to our main laboratory. There, displayed on a mannequin, was what appeared to be an ordinary athletic shirt, subtle gray fabric with minimal visible features. But as team members explained, the garment incorporated a complete distributed computing system powered entirely by the wearer's movement. Sensors woven throughout the fabric monitored vital signs and movement patterns. Processing capabilities analyzed the data in real time. Adaptive elements in the fabric could change properties in response to both physiological needs and environmental conditions. "The entire system generates and uses its own power," explained Dr. Wei Zhang, our lead electronics integration specialist. "No batteries, no external power sources, no separate devices. The textile is the technology." As I examined the prototype, Feeling the familiar weight and texture of fabric while understanding the extraordinary complexity hidden within its structure, I was struck by how far we had come from my early experiments in adaptive textiles. What had begun as materials that could passively respond to environmental conditions had evolved into active systems capable of generating power, processing information, and implementing responsive changes. True, intelligent textiles that blurred the boundaries between fabric, device, and interface. "This changes our roadmap completely," I said, already contemplating the implications for our research priorities and organizational direction. "We need to bring in computational specialists, user experience designers, data privacy experts. This isn't just a new product. It's a new framework for how humans interact with technology." The team nodded in agreement, already anticipating the evolution our work would undergo in response to this breakthrough. What none of us could have predicted in that moment was how this technology would ultimately transform industries far beyond. Textiles, healthcare, athletics, transportation, environmental monitoring, and eventually, human-computer interaction in ways that would redefine personal technology. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my lake house reflecting on the day's developments, I found myself thinking about the long, unpredictable path that had led to this moment. The painful dismissal by my father that had forced me to leave the family business. The challenging years building Genesis from nothing. The difficult decision to separate from the successful combined company I had created. Each apparent setback or sacrifice had actually propelled me forward on a trajectory I couldn't have planned, but that aligned perfectly with my deepest capabilities and values. I picked up my phone and called my father, something I rarely did without specific purpose or occasion. When he answered, sounding surprised by the unexpected contact, I didn't immediately explain the breakthrough or share news of Genesis's latest achievement. "I wanted to thank you," I said instead. "For what?" he asked, confusion evident in his voice. "For telling me I wasn't good enough to run Winters," I replied, surprising myself with the words as they emerged. It wasn't true, and it was painful to hear, but it forced me to find my own path rather than trying to fit into one that was designed for someone else. There was a long silence before he responded. "I wasn't right about many things back then," he said finally. "But I'm glad you found your way, even if it was despite my mistakes rather than because of my guidance." "I think that's how it often works between generations," I said. "We learn as much from what doesn't fit as from what does." We spoke a while longer about his latest boat design and my recent policy work, about Tyler's expanding consulting, practice in general family matters. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. That had happened gradually over the years, but it felt like the closing of a circle, an acknowledgement that what had once been a painful rupture had ultimately led to better outcomes for all involved. After we ended the call, I walked out to my dock and stood looking at the water, still and reflective under the rising moon. The journey from overlooked daughter to recognized innovator hadn't followed any conventional career playbook. It had required walking away from security, from recognition, from the very validation I had once desperately sought. Stepping into uncertainty guided only by the internal compass of my own values and vision. The next day would bring new challenges, integrating our breakthrough technology into viable products, expanding our team to encompass new disciplines, navigating the complex ethical questions raised by increasingly intimate human technology interfaces. But for that moment, standing between water and sky, I felt the profound rightness of a life aligned with its true purpose, not defined by titles or organizational size or others' expectations, but by the impact of work that could only have emerged from my unique combination of skills, experiences, and perspectives. The greatest leadership lesson I had learned wasn't about authority or control or even vision, though those elements mattered. It was about authenticity, the courage to step away from paths that others valued, but that didn't align with my deepest strengths and values. It was about recognizing that leadership takes many forms, and the most powerful contribution often comes not from fitting successfully into existing structures, but from creating entirely new ones that enable previously impossible connections and capabilities. As I turned to walk back to my house, I felt gratitude for the difficult gift my father had unintentionally given me years earlier. The freedom that comes from being underestimated, from having to prove your worth not through inheritance or position, but through creation. That freedom had led me to build something far more meaningful than I could have imagined when fighting to be recognized within the family business. Not just innovative products or successful organizations, but new possibilities for how technology and humanity might better serve each other in the years to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.